So it's the late 1970s and we're very lucky. We have a computer in our house. It is one of the early home computers. It wasn't an Apple II, it was a Commodore PET, which looked a bit like this. Here I am playing a game that me and my brother wrote called Surias. It was like a sort of Civil War type game. But that didn't take up all of my time. A lot of the time I spent playing two other games that other people wrote. One was a really cool machine code version of Space Invaders that may have been Japanese. But the other game that I spent far too long playing on the Commodore PET, which was one like this. It was an amazing machine. It had 8K of RAM. You programmed it in BASIC, had a built-in black and white cathode ray tube monitor and a terrible calculator keyboard. I was playing this game, which is a version of Star Trek. Now, Star Trek was a very common game to play on mini computers and microcomputers in the 1970s. There are lots of different versions of it kicking around that have their origins probably, I think, in the early 1970s. They were played on sort of mainframes and mini computers. It spread very widely because a version of it was published in a very influential book called 101 Basic Computer Games in 1975 by David Arl, and Basic Computer Games in 1978. So basically every computer going had a version of Star Trek on it in one form or another. So lots of people played different versions of this game. Probably one version or another probably came from this book, Basic Computer Games by David Arl. So I kind of got interested in that. I got a sort of nostalgic hankering to play this game again. And it took me a surprisingly long time to track down the source code for the game that I remember playing so that I could play it in an emulator. But I did find it in the end. A couple of interesting things happened when I was doing that. I discovered that it was actually quite difficult to find out information about early basic versions of Star Trek because a lot of the websites have just kind of vanished. They've just disappeared, link rot, that kind of thing. And then what I thought I'd do is I would translate the Commodore Basic version of the game line for line. So here it is. I'll just show you the listing of it. I thought, yeah, it's just basic. How hard could it be? I'll translate that to Python so I can have a modern version that I could play in my computer, in the command line of my computer. Okay, well, when I actually started studying the basic code in this, I discovered it was really rather opaque. It was very difficult to understand. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that it uses very dense multi-line basic statements, partly to save memory. So any extraneous spaces have been removed. You can probably see if you look up here, go sub 63500 : poke, there are no spaces. It's very hard to read. Other odd things are going on. There's lots of peeking and poking, which is interesting in itself because whoever translated the original kind of David Arl kind of basic Star Trek game for the Commodore PET knew the PET inside out, and they actually did a really good job. Let's just have a look at an early version and let's see what was normal kind of Star Trek like around this time. So I've got a version of it here. So if I run this, this is what I've basically borrowed this, and we'll talk about it later, but this gives you an idea what early Star Trek looked like on basic computers, on mini computers. So you've got a lovely bit of ASCII out there. You have navigation controls here. You type in commands with 3 letters. So if I type in SRS, that does a short range scan, and you can see it just scrolls up the screen. So it's designed basically to be played on a line printer. So you can imagine this scrolling up on a printer. And you've got a map that shows you the quadrant you're in. E is the Enterprise. You've got to travel around the galaxy searching for Klingon ships to destroy. So there's none in this quadrant, so we can do a long range scan. So I'll do a long range scan, and that shows me the quadrants immediately around me, and it shows you some numbers. And if you've got have a look at those numbers, they're significant. So the unit digits are the number of stars in that quadrant. You can see we're in the middle. There is 1 star. The tens column tells you how many star bases where you can refuel and get more torpedoes and that kind of stuff. More energy, how many of those? There are none in this quadrant, and the hundreds are how many Klingons. And you can see if we move to the right, if we kind of go east, we're probably going to find 2 Klingons, 1 star base, and 7 stars. So let's do that now. So if I type nav to move, Entering my course, it uses these horrible polar coordinates, really nasty, but I happen to know east is angle 1, so if I type in 1 and I enter a warp factor of 1, and you can see, oh my goodness, right, there's lots going on here. There are Klingon ships, there's a starbase, that's the S, I think, the Klingon is the K with a plus sign around it, and you can see all the stars. And if I want to fire at them, I have to get up a navigation computer because the angles are so difficult. I need some help to do that. It's quite tricky to play, but that gives you the idea of kind of how the game would work. I can also see where I've been in the galaxy as well. If I go to the computer, it will show me a map of all the quadrants in the galaxy, and the ones that I haven't explored have all got zeros in. Now, so that's the kind of original kind of 70s kind of Star Trek game, give you a flavour of it. Now, the version for the PET actually was rather better than that, I think. It was simpler in lots of ways, but it was well adapted. What they've basically done is turn it into a kind of video game. And I love this message that pops up at the beginning. One moment, please, while I arrange the galaxy. Someone has modified it for sound. I haven't got any sound on this emulator. And you can see straight away it does look a little bit different. We've got these circles instead of stars. We've got a much simplified menu structure, so we've only got 5 commands, whereas the other version's got loads of commands. I've still got a long range scan, so if I do L, it will show me the quadrants around in the same format, and I can see that if I go down, if I go sort of south, there are going to be 3 Klingons in that quadrant. So let's do that. Let's move. It's M for move. Instead of using these weird polar coordinates, the Star Trek version for the Commodore PET uses normal angles, with east being 0 degrees, and so I think if I want to go south, I think that's going to be 270. Let's just try that, see if that works. And I'm going to go 1 whole quadrant, and it moves. It's animated. You can see the Enterprise moving, and I pitch up, and oh my goodness, you can see the Klingons. So it's got like a simpler, cleaner map. If I do a long range scan, and then I do the computer scan, the record of the entire galaxy, you can see a nice feature here. Quadrants I haven't explored, instead of just being zeros, are shown as asterisks, which is quite nice. It's really easy to see where I've been and where I've not been. The other thing is it's really easy to see where I am, because the quadrant where I am, this 301 quadrant here, is inverse. Right, here we go. Here's another thing they changed. It plays in real time. I didn't type any commands in, but I still got destroyed because I had Klingons in my quadrant and I wasn't doing anything about it. So that's another interesting thing that they changed in this version of the game. It plays in real time. It's a real video game. It's got simple animation, and it's got this kind of real-time countdown where you're actually playing it more like a video game than a sort of text-based game that you play just by taking turns and stuff coming out on a line printer. So really interesting. It's a very, very nice port of a classic game to the Commodore PET. Whoever did this did a really good job, and they also knew the PET inside out. Now, a funny thing happened when I decided to try and port this game to Python line by line. I thought, well, I want a printout. I need a text file at least with all the Python code. I did manage to get it in the end. It took me a long time to do it. There's some information on my blog. I started annotating it, and something interesting happened. When I got to line 11 in the Python code, I found an interesting REM statement. Now, the REM statement doesn't appear when you do a line listing on the Commodore PET itself. So if I break out of the game, which I'll do here by just pressing enter here, if I do, say, list, if I do 1 to 20, so I list the first 20 lines of the program, you'll see there's no line 11, but actually there is a line 11 that appears only when you print it. And that line 11 says, if I can find it, property of Leonard Tramiel. Now, the name Tramiel will be instantly recognisable to anyone who knows anything about Commodore computers. Leonard Tramiel was the son of Jack Tramiel, who was the founder of Commodore computers. And Leonard's probably better known for his work with Atari, but at the time he was working for the family firm. And I wonder if it was actually Leonard who ported the classic early 70s basic version of Star Trek to the Commodore PET. Why do I think that? Well, it's got his name in the source code in a hidden rem statement, which is interesting in itself. But look at all these, the way the game has been adapted. It isn't just a line for line mod of classic basic Star Trek to the Commodore PET dialect of BASIC. It's more complicated than that because it's using a lot of peeks and pokes and features of the Commodore PET. It's using graphics, it's using simple animations, it's using little things to explode things and graphics and things like that. So someone's done a very nice job. So if anyone is in touch with Leonard Tramiel, and because I believe he's still alive, I would love to hear from him and ask him if he remembers anything about the history of this classic Commodore PET version of Star Trek and whether he was involved. Also, if anyone knows Duncan Langford, who seems to have, this particular version that I've got here was modified for him for sound. I think I did a little bit of googling. I couldn't find him, but it's possible that he worked at the University of Kent in England at some point. So if anyone has a contact details for Duncan Langford, I'd love to hear from him as well. He may have some memories. Now, I decided I wanted to convert it to Python. So what I did is I found that somebody had taken the classic kind of Super Star Trek game, a more fully featured one, and had converted it to C#, and someone else then ported that C# version to Python 2. Now, this version of the game is the one that we just looked at in the kind of beige coloured terminal window. It's got more features than I want. I want to make something that plays more like a video game, more like the original PET one. So that's what I did. I took that code that we have here. I'll quit out of that. And I have tried to make it a bit more like the PET version. So here we go. This is my attempt at turning that into the PET version. I've kind of melded the two together. There are some differences and there are some similarities. So you notice straight away the map here, the short range scan, is your basic kind of home screen. It keeps coming back to that. You don't have to type short range scan each time. If I do a long range scan, it will print it out in this nice compact format. I can do the computer scan, which prints out asterisks for the quadrants you haven't explored, and uses inverse video as well. You notice that I can see instantly where I am. I've used some ANSI escape characters to do that, and you can have a look at the source code to see exactly how I did that. It seems to work all right in the terminal on my Mac. I haven't tried it on any other computers yet, and it's still running in Python 2. I did try and port it to Python 3, and it was all looking really good, and then I realised some really weird stuff was going on with numbers and integers, so I've kind of paused the Python 3 port for now. That's going to need a bit more work than I thought. So let's move and let's see if we can find ourselves some Klingons. I've still got these horrible polar coordinates, so I put a little aide memoire pops up on the screen to remind me that if I'm going to go south, it's 7. And I'm going to go down, I'll go down 3 quadrants and I'll do another long range scan and let's see if we can find some Klingons. Great, there are some Klingons. So if I move, I'll go down 1 and then we'll go right, which is angle 1. We'll go 1 and we can see we've got some Klingons. Yay, we've got a starbase. Now, one thing that's missing from the PET version were phasers. Now, I sort of remember phasers from playing Star Trek on the Commodore PET. So I wonder if I actually played 2 different versions of the game. And I've just forgotten. But I've decided to keep phasers as a feature from that Python C# port of original basic Star Trek. So we can use phasers. Phasers are very easy to use. You don't need to direct them. You don't need an angle. You just fire them. They lock on automatically. You just give them loads of energy. They use up lots of energy as well. And you can see, there we go. I added a little bit of animation. I haven't added animation when the Enterprise moves yet. So if I go up, I go up 0.3. It just moves. You don't see the animation of the Enterprise moving that you get in the PET version. And the same if I fire a torpedo. In fact, it won't let me fire a torpedo even in this version because there are no Klingons present. If I do a long-range scan, let's see. Oh, there aren't any nearby. But in the PET version, if you fire a torpedo, if I've still got that open, let's just run it again. You'll see that the torpedoes, you can fire them in regardless of whether there are any Klingons present. And they're animated in a rather nice way as well. So here I am. if I fire my torpedo in the pet version, and I think it's 90 degrees to go up, you'll see the torpedo is a dot that's animated. So I'd like to add that to my Python version. That would be nice to have a bit more animation, but I've got my explosions, which is quite good. I'm quite happy with that. So there's a few other things to change. A few things that I won't change. I would like to get the angles sorted out so I can get rid of these horrible polar coordinates that if I fire my torpedoes, I can't do that because there are no Klingons present, but you have to use these horrible polar coordinates. I'd like to change that. There are a couple of things I won't change, however. I'm not going to make this play in real time like the pet version does. If I just sit here and leave this pet version running over here in this window, I will eventually run out of time and I will lose the game, even if I don't type anything in. I'm not going to attempt that with my Python game. I could do, but I'm not going to do it because I like the idea of just leaving it in a terminal window. I can close my computer up and I can resume playing the game the next day or in a few days' time, and I can just play it over a long period of time. However, this game is currently a bit too simple. So although I've got very simple 2-digit star dates that are counting down, it only counts down a star date when you actually move an entire quadrant. So if I move a quadrant, we'll see we've gone to star date 42. It's too easy, this version of the game, so I would like to change it so that it will count down star dates, maybe every time you enter a command of any sort, just to make it a little bit more tricky to get back to some of the hardness of this game, this version of kind of Super Star Trek. It's really hard to play because the other thing that this version has is damage, that things just break all the time. The Enterprise is really, really unreliable. Things just go wrong and break all the time, and it's quite frustrating. So I need to preserve a kind of balance to make this version of the game, of the Star Trek game, familiar enough that it's similar to the version I remember on the Commodore PET, and I think I've gone a long way down that path already, but also a little bit challenging to play and perhaps slightly more interesting than the PET version, having phasers as well as torpedoes, for example. If you're interested in how the code works, it's all over on GitHub. So that's the original Python 2 project of version of Super Star Trek, which I kind of basically I just stripped out a lot of functionality, and then I added stuff like ANSI codes to make it more like the PET version by clearing the screen and going back to the top. You can find that all on GitHub. I'll put a link below the video. You can look at the source code and you can see how I did stuff. These are some of the ANSI escape codes, for example, for putting reverse video and flashing stuff on. Try it out. See if it works in your computer, your setup. Bear in mind that this is a Python 2 program. I did try and do a Python 3 port, but it didn't quite work. There's a little bit more to it than just putting brackets around print statements. So I will revisit that. If you've got any memories of playing classic Star Trek on whatever kind of computer you may have had, particularly interested in hearing people who may have run it on mainframes or mini computers in BASIC in the late 60s or early 70s, I'd love to hear from you. And I'd really love to hear from anybody who remembers or has contact details for Leonard Tramiel. As a little nod to him, I have put in a comment at line 11 in my Python program, property of Leonard Tramiel.